And now, another informative video from the NASA archives.
Anyway, we progressed on, and they were smarter than I was, people that looked at the requirements for power down, and actually worked us on board in the lunar module down to 12.5 amps on a 30-volt system. So that's about in your home, if you had a sofa and two lamps on either end with three-way switch, that's about having those two lights up to the third click. So that's the kind of power we had. And as a result, at that lower level, there was not enough thermal insulation on the LEM. It was never planned to operate down at 12.5 amps. I think our lowest was right around 32, 35 amps. And power descent to landing, you're up about 60 to 65 amps. So we were way, way below the specifications. The vehicle got very cold and damp. And the lunar module, because of weight, there were no inner walls. It was netting material, which you could see through, and water was building up everywhere. At that temperature, now I'm guessing in the LEM down to the probably mid-30s Fahrenheit, a little above. The command module, it froze the water tanks. In fact, the water tanks in the command module was still found frozen after it was recovered and inspected on board the hangar deck and the ship and the aircraft carrier. So anyway, this water was built up. I could look in there and see around every corner of a plumbing or a wiring bundle, a glob of water sitting there, sort of shimmering from a little bit of vibration from glycol pumps or whatever. And that was worrisome. And one thing that really saved us even at that point was what had been done after the Apollo 1 fire. There had been a set of very rigid wiring specifications established when they reworked the ships. I saw it more from the Grumman angle. At that time, I was up at Grumman testing lunar modules, and one of the assignments I got was to join a crew to inspect LEM 1, the first unmanned LEM we flew, against this wiring criteria, which required wiring ties every so many inches on each bundle. And if you had any wiring clamps, they had to be perfectly round and not egg-shaped, carefully sealed at all connector interfaces with a material called Melcor. And when we inspected LEM 1, we wrote over 1,000 crabs with wiring problems. And LEM 2, when we looked at it, we decided it was well along, it just need to be rewired. So it just got pushed aside and was supposed to be the first manned vehicle, and it became the backup for the unmanned flight, possibly, and LEM 3 became the one that first flew manned. So anyway, that wiring, those wiring standards really saved us, I think, from suffering a wiring short in our situation with all that water. Jack Schwager and I went into the command module while Jim maintained calm and attitude in the LEM, and we started the power up of the command module. Another challenge for people on the ground, because there was no power up procedure. They had to invent that, although they had a leisurely 3.5 days to do that. But at any rate, we got ready to do this power up, and that was a little over 2 hours from when we were going to re-enter. So the amazing thing was that checklist was perfect. Perfect in the sense that normally if you're powering up and you don't have everything up along the way, you end up with warning lights. Not that anything's wrong, but that's just normal for the configuration of the vehicle. And that normally would have stopped us to now figure out what's going on. But every warning light that came on was called out at exactly the right spot. So we were able to get through that procedure very, very rapidly. Jack, incidentally, when we got in the command module, we had to get a towel out and wipe off the instrument panel, because everything was covered with water to see the instruments. And of course, we worried about our thinking about water behind there. When we first started the power up, the first steps were to push in all the circuit breakers that had been pulled out on 2 large circuit panels. And Jack suggested we push in only 6 at a time, and he called it when we'd start pushing in breakers. So we'd push in 6 down a row and stop briefly to see if we smelled wiring insulation burning, which would give you a nice odor. And we could quickly pull out those 6 and figure out which was maybe the culprit. But we went through that whole thing, and we did not have any problems. Just one last thing, the entry now, you have to realize we had frozen that vehicle for almost 4 days. Water tanks were frozen in it. We violated specifications on certainly all the avionics, the electronics. And it came back to life and gave us the 2nd most accurate splashdown of the program. Only Apollo 10 did better. As best they could measure the splashdown point to the ship. And so that was another one of the, I call it the miracles of Apollo 13.